Well, hello, everybody. My name is Chris Pallatroni. I am one of the co-founders of Modernize Home Services by Quinn Street. It is April 22nd, 2022. And this is an exciting one, guys. This is the first time that we have done a contractor survey. We're typically focused on the homeowner side of the business. So this is some insights from contractors around the world. There's me on the far left. And we have two wonderful guests today. One has been with us a couple of times, and I will let them both do an introduction, but we have Clay DeKorne and we have Spencer Powell. Clay, if you want to do a brief introduction, introduce yourself to the crowd, that would be great.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm the editor of the JLC group. What that mostly is the Journal of Light Construction. That's prime responsibility, but it also includes Remodeling Magazine, Tools of the Trade, and Professional Deck Builder are some of our niche media. But I'm a former contractor, third generation builder. I took the job of being a magazine editor back in the recession of the late 80s, and I kind of never looked back. So I enjoy talking to builders who are very excited about what they do and trying to bring a voice to them. So
awesome. Thanks for that, Clay. Spencer, want to give a quick introduction as well?
Yeah. Excited to be here today. And I'm the CEO over at Builder Funnel. We're a marketing agency specializing in really marketing strategy for remodelers. And my family goes back 4 generations. So that's how I got into to this world. But out in the Seattle market, they've been building homes, remodeling, handyman, property management, you name it, for about 110 years. So I'm come from a long line, and I got in on the marketing side and said, I'm not doing what you guys are doing. And but I got hooked in anyways. So.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Well, now that you guys both mentioned you have a background in construction, I feel compelled to feel like I also say, so for those that know any of my background, we started off as contractors way before we started this business in 2005. Don't have quite the rich history that Clay or Spencer does, but I did knock on a lot of doors. I did paint a lot of houses. So you guys are in for a treat. You're sort of getting a little bit of the editorial world. You're getting a little bit of lead gen in there mixed with marketing. All rooted in construction. So thank you for that. So hopefully not the only reason you joined us today, but a benefit of having joined us, we do have a drone giveaway. So during this webinar, the trusted crew behind the scenes will pull from a hat, and there will be a winner of this beautiful drone here, which we will announce at the very end of the webinar. So if you're not into the tech stuff, you're welcome to give it as a Christmas gift. Somebody will love that. All right, cool. Well, these are the main topics that we're going to be covering today. Once again, this is based on a contractor survey we did. If I'm not mistaken, we did this at the tail end of last year, sort of looking at what sort of the sentiment of contractors in 2022. So sort of reading through the bullet points here, we'll do a 2022 outlook for the home improvement industry. What were those big themes that we were seeing or hearing or contractors concerned about? We'll talk about supply chain. We'll talk about rising marketing costs. We'll talk about labor shortages, and we will talk about lead generation. So these will sort of be the major categories we covered today. All right. So as you guys can see here, the industry landscape by numbers. These were the 3 major themes that we saw pop up: rising marketing costs, labor shortage, and supply shortage. I'll give a little bit of my perspective here, and then I'd love to kick it over to you, Clay, and have you give a little bit of your insight to this as well. Having been in the contracting industry for 15 years, other than supply shortage, I feel like rising marketing costs and labor shortage are like always there. I realize supply shortage feels a little bit new with COVID and whatnot, but I am not shocked that labor shortage popped up. And I always feel like maybe because I'm part of a marketing company, we're always talking about rising marketing costs as well. But I'd love to get your perspective, and then we'll flip it over to Spencer.
Yeah, so definitely both of those are been with us, as you said, for a long time. The the labor shortage, I feel like we've been talking about it as a crisis, mostly a crisis of the skilled labor shortage for over the last decade, you know. And before that, I think we've always had a labor shortage, but the change in the skilled labor, you know, it's changed what the bar is for hiring. And it's now what I hear is anybody with a pulse. You know, it's kind of, that's how bad it is in terms of the labor shortage.
Yeah, I think it's interesting hearing you talk about like labor and marketing kind of always being there. And I think about the labor part of it just as like we see this like aging demographic that's falling off and retiring, and we're just not bringing people up through the trade schools. And I think that like it's just each year it's getting more and more amplified. And in the last 2 years, we kind of just like accelerated that because the demand shock was so heavy. And so then we needed more labor than we already had, which we were already short, kind of like how I think about where we are for home supply too. And then marketing costs makes a lot of sense because especially when you think about like paid channels, a lot of that has been driven online. So you think about like Google or social ads, and 2010 timeframe, like a lot of that was newer, and now we fast forward a decade and it's a lot more competitive, which just drives like your cost per click on a lot of those channels up. And then if you just think about hiring an agency, hiring on-staff marketing, like salaries have gone up over the last 10 years with inflation and all those other things. So those numbers don't surprise me, but I think those are some of those like high level indicators that go into that.
Yeah, and then, you know, we took this survey in December, I believe, of last year too. So this was before the word inflation was like posted over everything, right? This was before the war in Ukraine. Like, so this is coming, you know, people not having that sort of insight, and inflation's at, you know, 40-year high at this point. And so there's other factors that are sort of bleeding into this, but I do see, I think, you know, more macroly speaking, you know, and you speak a little bit as it relates to the marketplace, this is a little bit of a changing of the guard in some ways. I know some of these are pretty historical issues, but you know, the cat's out of the bag with COVID, and I think the home improvement industry is changing. That's a very slow change. But I do think that we're going to be facing sort of a new norm, if you will, over the next 5 to 10 years. So it was interesting to sort of see that sentiment before we caught some of the issues in the first quarter of this year. All right, Clay, I'm going to let you take it away here, share a little bit of your background here, and then we'll dive into some of the supply chain stuff.
Okay, so yeah, this is just the overview of what we mean by the JLC group. But as I say, that my daily focus is Journal of Light Construction. We constantly poll the JLC readership, which is mostly digital these days, but it's also a subscription-based magazine that's been around since 1982. And I think we're kind of reaching an audience of about 280,000 builders and remodelers who 90% are involved in remodeling, 50% are involved in new construction. So you can put that together as an overlap of a bunch of people out there who are doing both. My perspective is mostly on the general contractor, and I realize that's not everybody that's here, but hopefully if you're in the subtrades or other building professions, you can kind of put that together. But so what we're hearing when we poll our readers about supply, it's lumber, sheathing, OSB, trusses, I-joists, LVL, windows and doors, molding, cedar shingles, copper wire, switch boxes, conduit, concrete, drywall, siding. You know, as one of our readers put it, frigging everything. And how bad is it? Definitely people are losing jobs because of either the time or the price. Mostly it's about price right now because it feels like often in the form of clients deciding to wait, hoping prices are going to come down. The time thing, it's sort of customers are getting used to the fact that they want the job done. They wait a little bit, they check back with the contractor, and the lead time gets pushed out even farther. So a lot of our readers are only booking work in 2023 at this point. So huge backlog. getting those jobs produced is harder than finding the jobs right now. So maybe it's not so bad, in the fact that we're losing, but it's really the pain point is just that it's a pain forcing contractors to change how they work. Starting with the changes in business, a lot of folks are no price guarantee on materials whatsoever. Or if they do, it's a very short time frame, 5 days or 2 weeks. Or they're just doing a labor only bid. And that's definitely one way of doing it. It's a little tricky, obviously, with labor only bids, because you got to make sure that you are really charging for burden labor, not just on the direct costs like base pay, Social Security, Medicare, workers' comp, the unemployment tax, all those kinds of things, but also all those soft costs, which is like education, cell phone, tool allowance, vehicle. And these are all the benefits that, in order to retain that labor, and which we'll get to in a minute, is more and more part of the package. So getting that burden labor correct on labor only is a little tricky, because you also ought to be adding profit in on the labor only side. So that's something definitely that guys are figuring out how to do. On the business side, when you're doing fixed cost bids, more and more guys are implementing an escalation clause in the contract just to kind of cover them. But that assumes that you're doing fixed bid. It's probably still the majority, but I can't tell you, in the last 2 years, more of our readers have made the switch to going cost plus as a way of structuring their business. And it's, now with the demand, if you're thinking of that at all, and also charging for the estimate, or charging for some kind of pre-construction services, now is the time to do it, because the demand is out there for the work. So I think customers are much more amenable to opening themselves up to the trust, and you have to establish that trust to do cost plus work. But it's definitely where I see a big shift in our readership is going.
I wanted to jump in here and ask you a question.
Sure.
I got a couple in my mind, and I actually have one for Spencer after this as well. What are sort of the best practices to communicate this with suppliers and customers? Like,
Well,
how do you tell the customer that, hey, we may or may not get to your job in the next 3-6 months? What are you hearing as to what do you do with that information?
Well, definitely the whole, communicating with clients, I feel like you can't over communicate with clients. So, the way it's playing out is you have a meeting, you start talking about price in that first meeting, talking about the material prices and the changes, so that you're just getting out front with what the reality is out there. If you get them to agree to sign the contract, but you have this long lead time, right? Because it may be you're not starting their work for 6 months. So the way it's playing out with the materials is usually people are structuring it so that as soon as they sign the contract, they start purchasing materials. So they structure the deposit. They're not using their own money. Hopefully you're not using your own money to stockpile materials. A lot of people are doing that, sort of the toilet paper version, is buying plywood and that kind of thing. That means you're fronting your own money, which is generally tying up cash and not a good idea. It's better to sign the contract, take the deposit, and start purchasing materials. And so it does change how you structure the contract, right? So and getting the deposit to reflect that, and make that possible to stage all the work before you begin. And so that's going to push out the start time. And especially if you're being clear, look, we're not going to start this job until we have everything in hand, because that's really often the best for the customer, right? That you don't, especially in remodeling where you're working in their home, you want to make sure that you can actually complete that job before you begin to disrupt their life. So, but there's this long lead time from when you sign that contract and you've taken their money and you begin the job. So like constant communication, constant in that situation, I don't believe you can over communicate. And you just start telling them, yeah, here are the orders, here's the confirmation of our orders on, and we're still waiting, and show them those confirmations on the orders so that you make it clear to them that, the communication is all about maintaining trust. And that's true all along the process, all along the journey. And, if you go into the communication with trying to establish that trust to say, hey, look, we're in this together with this supply chain disruption, that I feel is when, you can't over communicate. Those customers are the ones bragging at the water cooler about you, that you're in it together with the right guy, the right company, because look, they're helping you get the best prices and the most timely turnaround. So
yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, just as a homeowner, I'm always putting myself in the homeowner's shoes. Like, I just want to know what's going on. Please tell me. Like, I hate guessing. Like, are you going to show up? Is this happening next week? I actually wanted to ask you, Spencer, and I know your focus is so much on marketing, so maybe like a double-edged question here. On one side, I'm wondering what your thoughts are around how do you sort of, in the spirit of, over communicating, what are you seeing from your perspective as good automated ways to over communicate? And then maybe as a segue into that, I don't know, if I'm a contractor, I'm thinking like, well, how much marketing do I really need to do if like I'm struggling to install stuff? Like, how does that sort of fit in with like what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'll kind of tackle those two parts. The first one, I think you asked about like automation, and I think about like automation or time savings, and really just to build on what Clay said is the over communication piece. You think about people doing their research, they want to do a project, like they may not have done a project prior to 2 years ago, or it's been a while. And so they have some expectation in their head. And so I think that's where marketing can kind of front that before you even get to sales, by saying like, this is what the industry looks like right now. Like if you start a project, don't expect to start it for 3 months or 6 months, or, whatever the lag time is, depending on what kind of work you're doing. But just explain why. People know that in the last 2 years, a lot of stuff has changed in a lot of industries. And so I think it gives you that opportunity to, one, over communicate, like Clay was saying, but build that trust from the front end. Because if you're the one out there kind of talking about the issues, but then what you're doing to be proactive and what you're doing to put them in a better spot or the best spot possible with kind of the cards that we're dealing with, then I think it starts to set you ahead. And even if you're a little more expensive, or you maybe can't get to it for a little bit longer than somebody else, they might still rather go with you because you've built that trust on the front end. And I think you can, to answer the question around automation, like I'm envisioning like a few strings of videos or pieces where you kind of explain like lag times and, the new process of deposit. We order materials, but then we're going to wait 6 months. We're going to get everything so that when we go, we can just go and minimize the time in your home. Like by the time they sign, you could have a trigger that like drips a video every week that's kind of like educating them on that process. So then they're still engaged with you, but you're not having to think about it with every customer you've just signed. So I think there's things you can do from that perspective, or just like create that material and send it as one-offs. It's less time savings than pure automation, but you can kind of time it based on that customer specific scenario. you asked me a second question around marketing cost, or do I even need to do marketing because there's so much demand?
Yeah, I'm just curious on that. Like, if I was a contractor and I'm thinking like, man, I'm having a hard time keeping up with jobs. I mean, I'm hearing more, and I'm sure it's probably more built into sales models today than it used to be 3 years back of, rescinding contracts. I mean, that was always a part of what we did, right? Hey, if I sign 100 contracts, I produced 95 of them. I'm pretty sure those numbers are a little bit more softened since then. And so, yeah, I'm sure some contractors are probably thinking to themselves, do I have to still market my business? Like, I'm having a hard time just, producing the work that I've already signed. Like, what are your thoughts around that? What are you hearing?
Yeah, so I think there's always like a couple of schools of thought. And one is, when things are good, I'm just gonna like cut my marketing and not worry about it and like just ride the wave. And I think we all intuitively know there are cycles. Things aren't like this forever. Many people listening probably have experienced cycles, the ups and downs. And so I think it becomes more of a shift. And so you're going, okay, maybe I'm not doing heavy lead gen, like trying to drive more contracts today, but you're saying, hey, I'm going to invest in my brand. I'm going to invest in education. I'm going to invest in some of these things that have like a longer time horizon. As a quick example, I think of like, if I needed a lead today, I could go to, a lead gen site. I could go to Google and just say, drive me some traffic. And I'm just going to put dollars in and start driving activity my way. That's typically going to be a higher cost per lead, but faster acting. Or I could say, I'm going to create some video content and some blog content. That's going to be maybe a little more time intensive and maybe more expensive in the short term. But over the long term, you see your cost per lead go down with generating your own kind of marketing efforts versus relying on maybe more like quick hitting things. And so I tend to be a very like long-term thinker. And so I would say, okay, how can I maximize the now to set my future self up? And then, customize it based on what you're trying to do. Do you want to build your backlog even more? Do you want to raise your pricing? Like, that's what I would be focused on right now, is do enough marketing so that you can literally price out most of the work coming to you, and the jobs you land are the highest profit margins, because I talked to a lot of people last year. They had record revenue years and record low profit years. Granted, there were some other, things with contracts that probably we didn't all see coming, where you kind of had to honor some things that were maybe in place. But yeah, I would say shift it towards more like generate quality and focus on profit.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Supply and rising marketing costs do not live in a silos, so everything is interconnected. Spencer, give us a little bit of background here.
Yeah, so like I said at the beginning, I've been kind of come from a family of builders and remodelers, but I've been doing this about 12 years. This meaning marketing for residential construction. Really today, our focus is on helping remodelers get more and better clients. Heavy focus on strategy over just like doing tactics, throwing marketing tactics at a wall. Like what are we really trying to accomplish? And we've generated a lot of sales, real dollars tracked back to our efforts over the years. If you want to learn more about us, builderfunnel.com. We've got a quick like website grader right on the homepage. And then the second link there is a copy of my book if you want to check that out. But that's a high level on me and what we're up to.
Yeah, I want to give one real quick thing here, because I was actually poking around on both of your guys' websites yesterday. Clay had some good articles there with regards to like training the next generation of builders. I really like that. One of the things I saw with your, Spencer, some of the audio stuff, and for a lot of people that are busy professionals, where am I going to find time to read more, educate myself? I'm constantly talking about this. You can always convert audio files to like MP3s, put them on your iPad, put them on your iPhone. You're in your car, you're driving, like just really good content to just constantly drip and just get a constant exposure to new thoughts is really, really helpful. So I love what both of you guys are doing out there. There's so much to be said in this one right here. Obviously, as it sort of points out here, there's some stuff with regards to the automation, but this was a big one. 32% of contractors said rising marketing costs were their biggest concern. It would, if we keep doing these types of surveys, it'd be great to get some sort of historical reference to that as well, that we could back this up. as I mentioned when we started, I always feel like this is sort of a concern, and I guess it depends on the contractor you're talking to, maybe some more than others. But I'd love to, start with you, Spencer, since this is sort of your bread and butter in some ways. Where do you channel your marketing spend? What are you recommending right now? I know you touched a little bit of that on the supply cost, but maybe very specifically, like, where would you recommend contractors channel their marketing spend if they feel like they have rising costs of marketing?
Yeah. So before I get to that question, I think it's kind of interesting that this one was still the third, the top three, because of your last question, which is a lot of people saying like, do I even need to spend on marketing? So in my mind, I'm thinking people are just flooded with demand. I envision all these people just like slashing their marketing to zero. So I'm curious why this was still so high, or what that like the context behind the question. But the answer to your question, honestly, I feel like doesn't change much for me when things are like this and when they're not. Is you should be channeling your marketing spend where you're getting the best return. And I feel like marketing is very much similar to business, in the sense that you want to do a lot of things that work, and then you're always running experiments and you're doing innovation because you have to propel yourself forward. And if you don't do that, you'll kind of get left behind. You can see it very easily with the digital landscape, and even within the digital landscape with social media. If you just said I'm all in on Facebook, and then you never adapted to Instagram or YouTube, and you just kind of stuck with that. Like if you never experimented and took that leap, then you totally missed that channel. And so maybe right now you're doing a little less experimentation and you're not investing as much into that bucket, and you're just channeling your dollars into the things that work, or that work. And there's a big little asterisk next to that, because most people don't have a good grasp on what is actually working of what they're doing. But that really is the key. Is if you're spending $100,000 a year on marketing, it's in different channels, and then ideally you would know what your cost per lead and your cost per acquisition is from each channel. And then if you're really focused on profitability right now, then I would say don't just look at those numbers, but go and look at, okay, maybe organic, you spent 20 grand on, and paid you spent 20 grand on, and they both produce the same amount of revenue, but one was a better profit margin customer, or better type of job. Like the more granular you can get, then you can say, okay, like I want to cut my marketing budget a little. Great, I'm going to cut the least effective part. And I would say, but honestly, if you're more profitable right now, like hold your marketing budget, set yourself up for the low cycle, because people are slashing marketing now because they think they don't need it. And then that's really what marketing during busy times does for you, is it allows you to do well and thrive during the low times, and then you pull out of the low times ahead of everybody else. So that was a little bit of a tangent off of your original question, but it really comes back to, for me, just tracking the results of each channel and evaluating.
That's great. What would you recommend? I mean, I always sort of hear this, technology is deflationary, right? Like as more technology comes into play, whether we're talking about marketing or any other facet of our business, it should drive down costs. That's the point of it. When you're thinking about this tracking, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, I think, the devil's in the details in a lot of ways, but, if you're not a contractor with a very robust system for tracking, what do you recommend? Like what's sort of the starter package from like technology, right? Like if we're just getting underway with this, like what are some of the things that you would recommend people, like, hey, start here and then maybe build yourself up to the Market Sharps, the Salesforce of the world or whatnot? Like what would you recommend to the person out there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I guess I'll say, like, you can start with like CRM and Google Analytics, but even then it's going to be really tough to get as granular as we just went. So you can go to Google Analytics, you can set up your conversion tracking, you can say, okay, I know my traffic from organic and my leads from organic, but you don't have names tied to them. You don't have that customer name tied to it. And so that's really what you need, is you need a tool that allows you to tie, you know, Mary Smith came to our website from this channel, filled out a form, and then we sign them as a customer. And then you can go back to the beginning and go, oh, they came from this channel. And so we're big proponents of HubSpot, and there's HubSpot equivalents, right? Like there's a bunch of software tools in that category. You mentioned a couple, but I feel like that's kind of table stakes if you want to be able to break it down to that level. Otherwise, you're just going to know, you're still going to be ahead of the game if you use Google Analytics and conversion tracking. You can see, what am I spending on each of these channels, and what are my lead conversions on these channels. You'll know your cost per lead numbers, but it's not going to give you, you know, everything you want. So there's a little bit of a leap there, I feel like, and that can be a little bit frustrating. But on the other hand, I would say, like, most people that are in that zone, they're just going to go, I don't need this, right? Like, I've been doing fine. And once you install it and you get it set up, you realize how powerful it is and how much it'll actually separate you over the long term from your competition, because you'll be armed with better information.
Yeah, and how you probably couldn't live without it now that you have it. I'm curious of your perspective on this, Clay. Like, when you think of, I guess, rising costs of marketing, you know, what from your perspective is important to understand when it comes to, like, the cost of marketing?
I'm trying to digest everything that Spencer said, because his mind is really quick on this stuff. But I have to say that his book was really helpful to me, and I guess I can't come at it from a more of an old school perspective. When I was in the trade, and I wasn't doing a lot of marketing, and a lot of the readers I talk to, marketing is kind of the last thing they think about. And I think that's probably, in this day and age, it needs to be stood on it. If anything's going to change, it needs to be turned around, and maybe marketing is one of the first things they think about. Marketing and establishing your expertise in the business, and how you do that, I think that those are equivalents. And being able to establish expertise is the one thing that's going to get you the most jobs, and the jobs that are going to establish those long-term relationships. You know, hopefully it's not just one job, but you've established a customer for life kind of thing, where they're always going to turn to you when they have something to do on their house, or at least ask you for a recommendation for. And that's the kind of relationship that I think, if you can establish that sort of expertise out in the field, is really what it's about. And I in terms of the cost, what you asked, Chris, I think that's where the money should be spent, is what's gonna reach the customer you really want to be working for. And I guess what I've seen as the most revolutionary in the last few years is Instagram. A lot of our community is moving to Instagram, and they're doing it both, you know, justifying the time and expense it takes to post and explain what they're doing to establish their expertise in the field. Justifying that because they're not spending that money, they're spending the time to do that, and meaning taking time out of their day to post and explain, and that's actually a lot of their marketing spend is going into that. And I think that's a fascinating revolution that's happened in the Instagram space, because it sort of defies a lot of the, you know, Instagram doesn't drive traffic to your website. And that's the way a lot of people like to measure things, but Instagram doesn't do that. It's much more based on, you know, establishing that basis of expertise. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but it's to me it's an important establishment in the way things are being done these days that is new to me for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to actually bring both sides of the world back on this one, because I think the answer is great. when I talk to contractors, so there's a couple of things that I think here. One, when it comes to like rising cost of marketing, I mean, I'm a marketing company. That's sort of like what I've been bred over the years. But I absolutely agree, Clay. Like, what contractors are after is word of mouth. And Spencer, I was actually listening to our podcast we did last August, and we talked about this. Is like everybody wants more word of mouth. How do you get more word of mouth? Sure, some of it is doing great work. There's no doubt about that. But you need more clients, right? And as you have more clients, that great work that you do can be leveraged to get more. And so going back to a little bit of the analytics here, and without getting crazy on any of our listeners, I get that there's limitations as to how much things we can track. We got to run a business. But I think understanding, like, yes, I do think marketing is great. We can sort of blur the lines between brand awareness and lead gen or marketing. Right. So if we're talking about Instagram, I think there's great opportunities to bring awareness to how certain elements of the job. I find myself always getting suckered into some little video, right? Some time lapse video of how something was done, or like, you're like, how's he going to cut that? And next thing you know, you're like, oh my God, that's so cool. I could never do that. Let's call these guys up. So I think there's some great elements in that right there. But at the end of the day, what everybody wants more is they want more phone calls of past customers that are looking to buy more of the product that you guys offer as a contractor, or they're looking for a referral. And I think the best way to get some of that stuff is you do a little bit of marketing, unless somehow you can create a magical business in which you just get one customer and somehow you just grow to whatever size that you want to be. So I do think you have to sort of nurture your customer base. And I think having some really basic analytics to lifetime value, right? So for every contractor out there that offers more than just a particular service, right? So if you're a roofer that also does windows, or a kitchen remodeler that also does additions, like there's so much value in finding ways to automate the touch points to those customers so that you are top of mind when the next project comes up. So I think lifetime value is really, really large. And if you do that with some simple marketing, it drives down your overall aggregate cost of marketing. So I think that's huge. Just asking for referrals is massive as well. And so like if you're a good contractor, and I think everybody will pride themselves in the work they do, but just being able to ask somebody, hey, Clay, if you love the work we do, most of our business is word of mouth. Do you know somebody that's getting some work done? And if the answer is no, that's great. Follow up, check in a year later. Hey, how's that bathroom? Anything came up? Hey, by the way. And so I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact that your best resource for leads in a lot of ways and to suppress cost of marketing is your customer base. If you've been in business for 10, 20, 30 years, you have a massive customer base of people that will either spend more money with you or know somebody that is spending money. And I think that just goes back to like overall lead nurturing. So when I think of rising costs of marketing, and this is a little bit of what you were saying on the previous slide, Spencer, is look, just have a system in place to nurture the leads that you are generating or have generated. And I think even if you're not perfect at how you nurture them, but you are nurturing them, I think in the long run, that's how you can justify a 10 or 15% cost of marketing that may be a very small percentage of your business, or maybe a meaningful part, but it will be offset by the referrals and the lifetime value of your clients, because those don't cost even nearly as much as a 10 or 20% cost of marketing. So I think it's a nice way to sort of blend the two of those together. I don't know, Spence, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's funny, like as you started, you're like, I'm going to pull these together, and your first few lines was literally where my mind was going with this is, everyone wants word of mouth and referral, and that's the ideal. But like, how do you get more of that? Like if you have 10 past customers, you're only going to get so much word of mouth and referral. So you need more new customers. But then really what it got me thinking about is, okay, how can we create and just kind of embrace that we're in this like supply chain problem, labor shortage, and just say, okay, I'm actually going to have more time with this customer. How can I think about making this a great experience throughout that? So if it's 6 months from contract signing to kickoff, what are some fun things you could do between now and 6 months from now that I would put into that like marketing bucket, but it's really customer experience. It's all leading to the same thing, which is a happy customer that's going to spread the word about you, right? So like maybe there's some fun stuff on social, maybe there's some just other random things you can do, but like that's where I would be thinking about is what can I do from a marketing perspective in between signing and starting, and then even starting throughout, like maybe almost make light of some of the things, you probably got to tread carefully there, but like, hey, this is nuts right now, guys. Like, glad we're doing this together. Like, I'm going to take care of you and we're going to make it a little fun. Like, they're more likely to probably share that experience. And so maybe just thinking about experience as marketing and the cost there to then drive the free customer when they say, hey, you should go work with these guys. It took a while, but like, it was fun, and it's going to take a while with whoever you go with. So
Yeah, without a doubt. This is actually, I think this segues really nicely into our next one. But when I think of rising costs of marketing, I think it as an opportunity, if you get good at it, to suppress your cost of marketing. I do think there's ways that you can compress your cost of marketing, which will free up budget, which when I think about labor shortage, not that it's purely just pay more money, but I think it gives you additional resources from a capital perspective to invest in this area. And so, Clay, I read one of your articles the other day. You obviously, this is sort of your domain here in some ways, but I'd love you to talk a little bit about sort of what you're seeing right here and like, how do we tackle this? This is a really big concern for contractors. Almost 60% of the guys that we surveyed said that this was a big concern coming into this year.
Yeah, and like we mentioned before, it's been with us for a while, and I want to focus on something that Spencer said when he addressed it, and that is, it's largely a function of our aging workforce, and I really want everyone to think about that, because when to really solve this problem, I feel like a lot of people are going out there saying, oh, well, it's compensation. If I can pay more, I can attract the best skilled labor, and that's true. And the people who are paying more are feeling the pain a lot less right now. And it's kind of like, you can do that right now if you're willing to pay enough, but for how long? Because that probably those guys who actually have the skills are much older, and they're going to age out. And so it's really, we need to be focusing on this issue as a way of how do we train the next generation of builders, to ensure that we can, have trust in this industry, and that it won't be usurped by, Amazon coming in and just selling kind of plug and play components and things like that, which is coming. It's going to be more and more of that kind of thing. But the industry has been doing that since the turn of the last century. We used to make windows and doors on site, right? So we've gotten used to the idea of building components and then getting more complex, and that's really what our labor is these days, is the assembly of components. But it's this demographic challenge we have, is how do we bring in. And I think one of the most concrete things that I'm hearing from readers out there is that as a company, you have to always be hiring. You can't wait till you lose a person to start advertising. And I think every company website should have a navigation point called careers, in which they're selling and literally marketing their company to prospective workers, prospective employees. And that kind of in the same way of always be hiring, the hiring process is not a one-time event. It's not a, find somebody, at whatever the bar is that you're holding up to bring them into your company. A lot of people are saying it's more about attitude than it is about skills at this point. If you get somebody who's eager and hungry to learn and join the trade, that is the bar to entry into the. But don't just hire them and then throw them onto a crew and sort of forget about them, and to make their own way, because they're the ones that are probably going to leave soonest if they don't feel like they're part of, so that the degree that which a company can create this path, and it probably looks like, the initial is recruiting, you make an offer, you hire them. There's usually an initial period where it's all about just getting to know them. And I don't think you have to have an HR department, or, it has to be a real formal process. It's just always checking in, either as the owner or the project managers, or however your company is structured, who's interfacing with those employees, to, always be checking in with them and find out where their interest lies, and begin to build a true training program. And a lot of people balk at the idea of training because it sounds expensive. It's this process, how formal you make that. The more formal and the more, I think, tailored to the individual you can make that training process, so that they feel taken care of, the more likely they're going to stay. And again, it's like building towards expertise. If you can make those new hires experts in one thing, they become that guy, then they can take pride in what they're doing. And if they have expertise, they're much less likely to jump to another industry. And so I feel like that's what the training process should be about. It's building that expertise in each individual. And of course, the career path that they know, like, this is a place I can stay. And I think the better companies are doing that. They're building employees for a lifetime, but those employees are also training for a lifetime, in the companies. Also, I just want to say that, compensation is important, but it's not always about the money. Benefits, especially flex time. If you can build flex time so that, these young guys who are building families, have time to spend with their families. If you can hire them on a 4-day work cycle where they're working 4 10-hour days and are off for 3 days at a time. Or maybe that's every other week or something like that, but so that they get more free time is almost more valuable than the paycheck at this point.
Yeah, those are some good points, because I think we all can appreciate it's not always money. And look, think about the opposite end of that spectrum. If all you were able to do was attract people through money, and I think you said this right in the beginning, like, at one point you may not be the one with more money, and like you don't want to create such a fickle staff through that. So I do think, and this is such a big topic. I mean, for the sake of time, we'll move on to the next one here in a minute. But I mean, I'm thinking like, oh my God, like, your efficiency to run a good business controls like your ability to not to have to lay people off at certain times, and that impacts your labor. I'm thinking more tech, like, there's a lot of stuff that's trying to be done in the space, the HVAC space, of how do you sort of use some technology to replace some technicians, and how do you become maybe more efficient at scheduling so you don't require such a heavy staff. Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can go, but the ones that I really like latch onto, and what you said is, it's part of its culture. I think it's like, how do you build a good company? How do you show people the career path that, like, yes, you may start here, but this is a good life, and like, there's opportunity to move up from here. People want to have impact. People want to have meaning in the work they do. I was talking to a coworker yesterday, and Google did a really big study years back called the Aristotle program, and they sort of dissected like the best teams, and they were trying to figure out like, what's the secret ingredients to the best team out there. And 2 of the 5 ingredients was impact and meaning, right? And I think that plays really important into it. It wasn't, I don't even actually think they listed money as one of the like things right there. It's like, oh, if you pay me the most. So I think those are really big. This could be an entire webinar on labor, because once again, as I've said on almost every slide, this is an ecosystem. So much of this all plays into the next. So great insights there. We've touched on a lot of this stuff, like, as we've sort of gone off on this. Knowing what we've covered already, Spencer, when you think of rising costs of marketing, you think of supply shortages, we think of labor issues, and now we're sort of finishing off with You need leads though, right? You need lifeblood to your business. What have we left out of this so far? Like what have we not touched on that would be important for the audience to hear as it relates to lead gen?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this before we started, and I think one of the easiest ways to break down, like I really like thinking about SEO and then like the paid side, like just driving, like whether it's Google or Facebook or whatever. And I look at like paid as renting and SEO as owning and like building a portfolio. And so right now I would be thinking about kind of those two buckets and what's more important for what your business needs right now. And if you're in the bucket of most people are like, I'm booked out, I have plenty of leads, I'd be really heavily focused on building my organic presence and my SEO, knowing that that's going to solidify you no matter what the market looks like. Like if you're ranking at the top for lots and lots of keywords, then you're going to be ranking at the top when there's 1,000 searches a month, or maybe when demand slows and there's 500 searches a month, like you're going to get a larger share of that search. You can't control the demand side of the equation, right? Like people are going to do home improvement and remodels and whatever they want, and that will ebb and flow. But what you can control is like your share of getting noticed on Google as people are doing those searches. So I think like we already touched a little bit on like social and branding and some of the experience stuff, so I won't rehash some of that. But I think if I were to leave people with just thinking about like, those are a couple of big buckets that you can really think about. And if you need more leads today, then maybe you push a little harder on the paid lever, right? Like that's going to be your amplifier, your quick driver. But if you don't, then I'd really be thinking about like invest now, set yourself up. So as all the demand slows, if you increase your share, you might see that you actually just hold steady when things kind of cycle down. So that's how I think about it at a high level. I did, if it's okay, I want to pop back to just the last slide that we were talking about, and your points that you guys were both making. I think you like nailed it. And as I was thinking about it, I feel like there's really two like ways to kind of like, I don't know, I'm a simple guy. I try to like break stuff down into simple concepts, but it's like demographic problem, right? Like we've got really people that are going out of the industry and not enough coming through the industry. And that's just because we've marketed to the younger generations, go get a 4-year degree and go get like a non-blue collar job, right? That's just been like general like marketing awareness of culture, I feel like, for the last however many years. That is tougher. Like we're all like, as an industry, we're trying to combat that. And then the other piece of it is just like embracing training within your company. Because I think we all have this expectation that like somebody new is just going to come in and they're going to know stuff. It's like, I went to 4 years of school. It didn't do anything for my real world experience. And I think that applies like almost across the board. Like school doesn't teach you on the job skills. And so if you just say, I'm acknowledging that, I have to control my own training. And I would just get over it and embrace it and just say like, I can control that piece. And then we're all trying to chip away at like building better cultures, better teams to attract people into the industry. And that's going to take a concerted effort to overcome that. But control what you can control. And so anyway, I just wanted to kind of frame that. I feel like there's those two big components and we can for sure control one of them.
Can I echo one thing on there that embracing training part of it is the other way to think about that is you're going to be paying for that, whether you make it an intentional budget item or not, right? Because, you know, reduced productivity and liabilities on the back end, whether that's callbacks, warranty claims, or the worst case is litigation, by not having trained staff who are really doing it as best as they can and as best as you as a company can. So I think that puts training in perspective, you know, that cost, you're going to be paying for it if you do or if you don't.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I'll piggyback on that as well. Like I think going back to the career planning and providing a meaningful role that people play within the organization and showing the impact they make, like if you can solve that on an individual level, you're best. I mean, very much like getting more work. your best way to recruit is going to be through birds of a feather flock together, right? Like the people that are working for you, if they're happy, if they're empowered, if they feel like they're making an impact, if they feel like their career is growing, not just their paycheck, like these are all things that make them happy. And people want to know, like, well, why are you so happy over there? I work for this amazing company. You should go check it out as well. When I think of lead gen, there are so many options out there. I mean, it is just overwhelming. And so if you look at this slide or think about all the ways in which you can market your company and it becomes overwhelming, I would just say this: you just start with one thing and get good at it. It's not that you can't layer in another one. It's just basic habit formation. You got to start slow. You got to set the bar low. Like, get good. If you're a door knocking company, just get good at knocking on doors. Build a good system. Track things. Standardize your processes, and then fold in something else, be it an Instagram feed or PPC marketing or whatnot. Like, the best companies do a lot of things, but they didn't do a lot of things all at once. And so, and I would say even more before that, spend some time with your team and think about what you want to accomplish. Like, reflection goes a very long way in this. Be intentional. What brand are we trying to build? What values do we have? What are our goals as an organization? And try to create some North Stars. And then from there, start to chip away at some of the marketing stuff and some of the labor stuff that will help you get there. So really good stuff here, guys. Really appreciate all the insight, Clay and Spencer. Great having you guys both on and sharing that with the audience. We do have a winner for the drone. So we will be emailing this person as a follow-up to this. But the hat that, the name that was pulled out of the hat is Tim Gordon. So if your name is Tim Gordon, then you are the winner of this beautiful drone. Our team will follow up with you via email, and we will find a way to get that over to you. For everybody that joined us today, really appreciate your time. Thanks for spending the last hour with us, and thanks for our panelists, both Clay and Spencer. You guys have been great. So thank you for all that. And all the people behind the scene that you do not get the opportunity to see. We've got an army of people here on the Modernize side of the house making this happen, as well as both on Clay and Spencer's team. So thank you for everybody. It takes a village. So thank you, guys. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.